Welcome to our second seminar in the series of 3 from Container News. My name is Nick Savides. I'm the managing editor at Container News, which has been running a cargo integrity campaign for most of this year, publishing monthly stories regarding the health and safety in the maritime industry. Last week, we discussed design issues on container ships that increase the impact that fires on board a vessel can have. Yesterday, the Singapore authorities released its report into the Maersk Honam disaster, which saw the death of 5 crew and destroyed a newly built container ship. Singapore investigators were pretty damning in their conclusions with regards to the regulations, with the rules on chemical substances known to have been stored in Bay 3 of the Honam that are known to be dangerous, but regulations that the investigators said were 40 years out of date left the vessel unprotected. Inadequate firefighting equipment, which met all regulatory requirements, current regulatory requirements, did not protect the 27 crew members on board the Maersk Honam on the 6th of March 2018. Last week, ahead of the publication of the Honam report, Captain Singh Brough outlined the problems in a presentation that he has made on other occasions. This week, we are joined by Peregrine Storrs-Fox from our sponsors, the TT Club. Peregrine has been a prominent cargo integrity campaigner for more than 10 years, and we will learn more about the dangerous cargoes from him. While Richard Brough from ICHCA, also a prominent cargo integrity campaigner and a colleague of Peregrine's in the newly established Cargo Integrity Group, will look at how regulation can improve safety at ports through the better communication between vessel operators and terminals. Following another major accident this year in Beirut, in an extended seminar, we will also hear about the landmark ruling in the MSC Flaminia case from 2012 from MSC's Laurent Audaz. And rounding off the presentations will be ZIM and Exis that offer some solutions to what Bing Bing Song from the IMO referred to as misdeclared and non-declared dangerous cargoes, making the distinction between errors through the lack of knowledge and the more sinister intentional non-declaration of known dangerous goods that sometimes happens. We know that the IMO's Maritime Safety Committee will meet at the end of this month. That's in November, actually. Under difficult circumstances, but we urge them to make substantial moves towards bringing regulations up to date for the safety of the crews working on vessels, for the protection of the environment, both in the ocean and the air that we breathe, and to prevent the massive costs and disruptions to supply chains. As I said earlier, our panel of industry experts will be led today by Peregrine Storrs-Fox, who has been a major source of inspiration for our cargo integrity campaign. Peregrine and our sponsors, the TT Club, have been very supportive, offering the virtual arm around the Container News' shoulders when necessary, as well as the metaphorical slap around the face when I've got into a panic mode, only virtually, of course. I would like to thank our sponsors at the TT Club for their continued support, as well as offering our thanks to the hundreds of thousands of seafarers who put their lives at risk every day to keep supply chains moving. We salute you. And on to practical matters now. Those of you that attended last week's event will have noticed the technical hitch that ended the seminar, for which we apologise. This issue has now been resolved. If you have a question, please use the box to the right of your screens to post questions, which will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Any questions that we do not have time for will be answered by email after the event. And finally, if you encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please chat to us, or should I say to Catherine, who is managing the webinar, using your chat function. But for now, I would like to welcome our first speaker from the TT Club, Peregrine Storrs-Fox. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And if I may add my welcome to everyone, I'm delighted that you've joined this session and look forward to a lively interaction, both at this seminar and into the future. Many of you will know that TT Club is a specialist insurer providing coverage for all types of activity through the global supply chain, with focus on intermodal movements. so I won't introduce more than that. Moving on, though, in terms of what this is all about, TT Club analyses confirm industry-wide concerns, indicating that 2/3 of incidents related to cargo damage are caused or exacerbated by poor packing practices. The range listed here on this slide have been identified in litigation in major incidents, but are as prevalent in lower level attritional incidents that result in disruption in the supply chain, as well as injuries and considerable cost. Indeed, extrapolating known figures, it's estimated that the total economic cost to the transport and logistics industry exceeds $6 billion annually. The most galling aspect of this is that the vast majority is avoidable by adopting established good practice. In the time available, I can't really provide more than an introduction to a range of issues pertinent to cargo integrity and dangerous goods specifically. First off is the regulatory environment. We all know that IMDG, the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, is a derivative from the UN recommendations on the transport of dangerous goods model regulations, colloquially known as the Orange Book. There is much that could be said, but I'm a lawyer by background, not a scientist. Two essential comments, though, from me. Firstly, these regulations are very complex and require diligence and expertise to follow. And secondly, words are often open to interpretation, even between experts. The second issue is that different codings are used for various aspects of international transactions. Particularly here, the harmonized system is used in a non-mandatory environment for customs and fiscal purposes, whereas we have the globally harmonized system for classifying and communicating hazards in relation to commodities, chemicals. There is currently no complete read across between those two coding systems that could validate declarations that are made by shippers, even if they were viewed together, and generally they're not. This actually leads to the third concern, that there are multiple different tracks of data that are generally not correlated. Just in relation to dangerous goods, the transport contract, typically a bill of lading, runs in one route, one flow, and may or may not be supported by something like the Safety Data Sheet, SDS. But the dangerous goods declaration, where it is made, is on a totally different track, related specifically to ship stowage conditions for maritime carriage. As I come to later, how goods are declared is determined by the shipper, with potential latitude in classification, descriptions that may be close to reality or total fiction. And this becomes a bit of a lottery to those providing transport due to the volumes concerned, which was a point that was actually accepted in the carrier's defence in one major litigation. Moving on, since a regulation such as IMDG or non-mandatory codes such as the CTU code are long and complex, they often seem to require guides to aid understanding. On this screen are a couple of examples in which TT has been involved. Of course, these guides are not substitutes for the core material, the codes in this case, and they're not training, but they can provide ready route maps and assist people to understand what their obligations are. It follows that expertise and often experience are very much required. And from the evidence of incidents, they're insufficiently available. This is particularly an issue where so many individuals and entities may be involved in evaluating decisions and communicating accurately. And these need to be taken account of in terms of the changing circumstances. Classification is actually a prime example, cargo classification. It seems to me that there are strong interests that may downplay the hazards of new or variant chemicals. Again, I'm not technically competent, but I'm always on the alert when I see Class 9 marine pollutants as the classification, particularly where it's supported by what's known as a special provision that has the effect of derogating from a full application of the dangerous goods regulations. I show this slide really, it's an extract from the CTU Code, a quick guide, which was recently published by Cargo Integrity Group, to which Nick referred earlier. A collaboration between Container Owners Association, Global Shippers Forum, ITCA, TT, and the World Shipping Council. This depicts the key types of actor involved in the supply chain. And even in this simplified diagram of complex relationships, it's evident there are many different decision makers. And as you proceed through the supply chain from left to right on this screen, each new actor is wholly reliant on the steps taken beforehand. I could say a lot more about that slide, but in the interest of moving on, we'll keep to the next slide. The fragmented stakeholder pool described before is particularly poignant when we consider the context of transport on now the largest container ships with capacity of 24,000 TEU. That's 20-foot equivalent unit being the standard measurement in the containerized industry. And because about 2/3 of the trade use 40-foot units, we could estimate one of the largest ships could have 16,000 or roughly 16,000 actual boxes at full capacity. While the number of units will involve one shipper, full container load, a huge volume will have many more shippers in one box. Added to this, there will often be freight forwarders or logistics operators involved as intermediaries between the actual shipper and the liner carrier. For this reason, the fundamental requirement for effective, safe, and secure trade is trust, truth, and transparency. The challenge is how to achieve that with tens of thousands of relationships. The circle displayed here seeks to show what may be in place to assist carriers and others in having confidence. So starting at the top, the know your customer, and remembering that many relationships are indirect, it's critical to gather what data is available about the actual customer. There may be government registrations for corporate entities. It may be possible to do some sort of physical checks on the location, or even Google Maps checks, which may show the nature of the shipper, the factory, whatever is involved. So there may be checks, but knowing your customer is fundamental in this environment as much as in relation to other responsibilities such as sanctions. Moving on to cargo screening, liner operators have over recent years built increasingly sophisticated measures to understand what is being presented and whether it may present more of a risk than is on face value. Later on in this webinar, there will be a couple of presentations that look at examples of that. And I think the key issue is, for me at least, is developing systems that pick up the multi-layered triangulation challenge. That, as I referred to earlier, there are different elements of data passed in different tracks, and therefore the ability to capture that and to deal with it effectively is increasingly important. DG compliant software is widely available, and as I've said already, these are complex regulations and there is a mismatch. So the capability to misdeclare or not declare is out there, but DG compliance software and tools does help with that. X-ray CT scanning is probably not much of a reality in the commercial world yet. There are 1 or 2 places where that does happen, and I understand has a good level of definition. But even with that, it's probably going to be indicative of a risk rather than conclusive. But it could support, particularly the next one, inspections, physical inspections. Obviously, in the intermodal supply chain, and particularly at ports where it's a nodal point, there are the abilities to carry out simple basic checks, such as does this box leak? Is there something coming out of it? Does it actually have a particular odour? Are the sidewalls bulging, which might indicate that there is something wrong with the nature of the cargo that's being packed, or that it's not quite what it should be. But those require, obviously, systems and processes to be in place, and they're not necessarily going to be fully responsive to what's going on. Inspections, though, can go through to full government inspections, and there's an IMO circular that covers this, that sadly many governments don't follow through very rigorously, or at least they're not reporting on their findings, which means that the industry doesn't learn from what is happening. So there needs to be more attention to inspections. Some are carried on systematically or as a responsive measure on a commercial basis as well. Each of those obviously is adding to the control available. Internet of Things, I understand that possibly around 5% of boxes now have some form of device, and that's obviously started with higher value goods and containers such as reefers. The capability is increasingly there, and the technology is overcoming the practical issues of battery life and connectivity. So those sorts of devices will, in the future, help to be able to monitor things and potentially to evidence the level of transparency that the industry would require. An important element that I think arguably is not working as effectively as it could do is around enforcement. The commitment at national level is complicated for a variety of reasons, because of multi agencies within any jurisdiction. Potentially that means that it's not very clear who is going to enforce, but the reality is that, as I said, with the government inspections, they're not happening enough. There's probably not enough attention to enforcement and following that through in terms of taking legal action, prosecutions where there's a fault found. That differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but it becomes a critical part of this control circle that is to provide comfort and enable reliance between supply chain actors. And that kind of leads on really to the work that we've been doing amongst the Cargo Integrity Group, and as I use the hashtag Fit for Freight. And although we've already published one document, which is around the CTU code, these 4 bullets outline the other areas of interest that we are pursuing. And it isn't just ourselves. So these 5 organizations have committed to work together on these things, but we are seeking to engage with other similar organizations or specialists in different aspects, and indeed with governments and the intergovernment agencies as well, to be able to drive forward what is necessary to bring about safety. So the first one is looking at the CTU code, and I don't need to address that in much more detail, go to look at the guide. The second one is seeking changes, particularly around IMDG. So there are already actions in place at IMO with regard to reviewing special provisions. And as Nick referred to earlier, some of those special provisions haven't been touched for 40 years. So things do change and they need to have review and rigor to that process. That, because of COVID, has been delayed somewhat, but it's in action. And there are other activities to ensure that there is rigor towards classification, there is rigor around that process, as well as other regulatory issues, such as the inspections. With regard to the good practice on emerging trends, we are actively looking at different tools and capabilities to help with regard to inspections in particular, to move that forward and make sure that that part of the jigsaw works. And as I said, we are working with other industry and governmental stakeholders as necessary, and not just in relation to the immediate supply chain, but also beyond that to other stakeholders such as fiscal customs agencies or those involved with security, so that they understand that what we see as deficiencies may well have an implication for them for the work that they're doing. So there's a broad spread of activity that is being carried on within the Cargo Integrity Group to try to drive through change and bring about greater certainty and safety through the supply chain. With that, Nick, I'll pass back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Peregrine. It's interesting that you very ably demonstrate the complexity of the supply chain and the number of players within it. I think me and you have spoken on a number of occasions about education being crucial, and that leads on to communication and enforcement of those regulations. And I think that ably demonstrated by your presentation. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'd like to introduce now our second speaker from one of the major lines, the second largest line in the world, Laurent Audaz, who is the Head of Insurance, Legal and Claims at MSC. Take it away, Laurent.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you everyone for watching, and welcome at MSC in Geneva. So yes, I was asked to present you the different type of problems that those misdeclared goods are generating for carriers. And if all go well, you should see some pictures of exactly the type of problem our crew members are facing on board. And I'll let you imagine, when you are in the middle of the ocean, how you feel when you face this kind of fire and explosion in the middle of the sea, and with very little information as to what is burning and what are the risks you're exposed to. You can see here the Musconam, which is a very recent fire generated on the way to the Gulf out of Singapore. So just to give you a precise idea of what are the practical effect of those misdeclared cargo. So this story of a fire on board vessels has started already back in 1999 and 96 with the Hyundai Fortune or CMA Jakarta. And as you see, even though we have been trying to solve the problem with different measures fighting against misdeclared cargo, we're still in 2020 dealing with the same type of issue. Now, those are really misdeclared goods of self-combusting nature, which are really creating problem recurrently. I would like to expand a bit the scope of the topic, because over those dangerous goods cargo exploding, we also have a lot of illicit shipments, such as drugs and narcotics. You probably heard that MSC was hit quite badly last year with MSC Guyana in the US. But we also had our competitors, CMA CGM, being involved in unwilling transit and transportation of weapons with the CMA CGM Victoria, where the vessel was seized by the IDF, by the Israeli forces, on the way to Egypt. And we have recurrently problem of contraband and counterfeit goods, which create a lot of issues. And the latest in date being the in our view, too wide readings that the Antwerp customs are doing of the new European code, by which they hold the carriers responsible for fine and duties over non-declared goods. So all those goods are relating to cargo that are intentionally not declared or misdeclared. But we also have a lot of cases where the cargo is not properly or mistakenly misdeclared. The most recent recent example of the past years was the question of the VGM and misdeclared weight. So MSC has been really on the front line to try to obtain this evolution of SOLAS, so that the shippers are now obliged to declare the VGM of the goods, the verified gross mass. But even though we still had some issues with the MSC LOAN in 2017, and the CMA CGM Washington was also impacted not so long ago. The problem we face with the VGM, for the one dealing with that aspect, is that it remains a declaratory system. So we have not reached a system by which we can really check on the weight, and those collapse of store are a real issue. Now, talking still about mistakenly declared goods, we end up having some cases of dangerous goods that are declared to us, but still not properly, or we don't have the proper set of information that should accompany those cargo. And MSC was again very strongly hit with our MSC Flaminia in 2012. For which I would like to remind you that following the kind of pictures you saw some moments ago, we had 3 people passing away. 2 were found dead, and 1 person is missing. And we had to pursue a litigation. And in that case, we were quite lucky that the shipper was a renowned company, and the freight forwarder also was someone well known and with proper assets. So we stood a chance to go into litigation, and the U.S. courts, this case was brought in the U.S., took a landmark decision where the Judge Forrest in 2018 made undoubtedly clear that the shipper has the obligation to provide all details about the cargo, but also all the information relating to the storage and package of the cargo before it is given to the carrier, which was the issue at stake in the MSC Flaminia. The cargo was properly declared, but the storage was not as it should have been, and basically we were carrying a ticking bomb on board our vessel. Just as a matter of mentioning, we had the MSC Daniela, which was also what we suspect was a misdeclared lot, but we're not able to identify, or the fire expert were not able to identify which lot precisely was a problem. And as I mentioned earlier, the Maersk Conam is also quite a recent case where, once again, I would like to stress 5 people lost their lives, 5 seafarers. And this simply shouldn't happen. Just to brush the type of problem we are facing, and the extent of the problem we are dealing with here. Now, what are those problems? What type of problems do we face? I mean, the first one, as I said, is the loss of life. It cannot be that our crew and seafarers are losing their lives, and we get mourning families just because they're doing their job. This is simply a risk that the carriers shouldn't accept, and we don't accept it. So we are extremely strong, and this is why I'm here with you today. Then, of course, those damage, you saw the pictures, are creating heavy damage to our ship. They sometimes trigger pollution risk. In worst cases, when the cargo, not in worst cases, in some cases where there is no loss of life, we still have our vessel arrested. We are exposed to an astronomical amount of fines. And we shouldn't forget that those misdeclared goods can trigger in certain countries some criminal action against the carrier, but also against the crew members. And once again, we end up in a situation where people doing their job properly just end up into criminal proceedings and fearing for their freedom. And once again, this shouldn't be. So I will not go into the complete list, but you can imagine yourself the reputation damage on the shipping line is not something that we are willing to accept. We at MSC, for instance, are working very seriously, have an extreme strict process of vetting all our vendors and suppliers and clients and crew members, and when something hits us, our name can be ruined in one occurrence, and this is not something we are willing to accept. And of course, the cost. I mean, any of the cases I was mentioning earlier generate heavy legal and court costs, because there is the trigger a crossfight between carriers, ship operators, and owners, between ship operator and clients, and they turn out generally in battle of experts, because when you have a fire, it's extremely difficult to trace back the source of the fire, and it takes a lot of time, and most of the time this comes with a very important cost. And just to finish on brushing the costs and problems, those misdeclared goods, you can see from the pictures that the cost involved in case of damage to ship or pollution or loss of life, we're talking about hundreds of millions every single time, and these go far over the marine insurance provided to the carriers by the P&I pool. It goes onto the market, so basically it has an impact on the insurance of everyone, whether it is for car or for household. You pay your portion of the risk taken because of some rogue shippers misdeclaring their goods. So this is why it is in MSC view very important to be here, to be on the front line again, try to push back and move the line, so that some cooperation are put in place, some control are put in place. Yes, to put an end to this kind of situation, which is, as I said, not acceptable anymore for carriers and shouldn't be acceptable to us. Now, this is for the problem. Of course, what are the solutions? We have the problem, but it's not simply that we need to talk about it. We want also to have some solutions. Just talk about MSC. We have since many years a very strong vetting, as I said earlier, of our suppliers, of our vendors, of our clients also. And we of course try to make sure that there is no loophole in our checks, and this worked quite well. Nonetheless, it is very cheap for rogue shipper to create a company and create an appearance of seriousness, and this is not good enough anymore. So MSC is very strong on the digital tools. I am personally a very big, strong believer that the digital world can bring us a lot of solution, because you cannot then avoid to create some tension if you are a rogue shipper between the information you give to the carriers and information you give to the customs, to your freight forwarder if you go through a freight forwarder. So by having all those data into the blockchain, most of the time we end up being able to spot tensions in the information given, and then go and check. Basically, it's a very practical solution. So MSC, but a lot of carriers are involved in smart containers. You probably heard about Traxens, which is basically a company producing smart boxes that are affixed to the containers. But we have a different project like Wave, the EBL offloading that MSC is now using, where we have all the data digitalized, and we try to bring that platform banks and customs to make sure that also all the information and data surrounding the custom clearance or the bank financing are put into one platform, and then we can again stand a chance to see whether there is some tensions and incorrectness between what has been given to us and what is given to the other stakeholder in the logistic chain. So the digital world might be and will be the solution for the future. Now, it is good to be able to be more reactive and to draw some patterns from what we hear. But of course, what is key is a collaboration with the authorities. I need to stress that every cargo coming out from China wears a proper stamp from the Chinese customs, whether it blows in our face underway or not. Those containers have been going through the Chinese authority check, and nonetheless it remained unnoticed. So we need to make sure that we make our partners in China aware of the risk, and obviously the situation they face in Tianjin was a wake-up call for them. But we need to capitalize, even though it's a terrible word to say, on that catastrophe, to make sure that they realize that we're talking about loss of life and million and other million of costs that are generated. When it comes, I'm focusing on China because, of course, it's one of the biggest export area. But talking about the import areas, or whether it's in Europe or Africa or in America, we need to focus on cooperating even more and even stronger with the enforcement authorities. The financing are scarce at the end. For us, the industry has been suffering a lot over the past decades. But nonetheless, we need to find some ways to be more alert, more agile. We need to find a way to exchange information between us, so that if one of the competitors is hit by an incident, we can immediately track back with the shipper, with the freight forwarder, what was the channel used by this cargo, so that the other carriers can be informed in good time and make that check before it's too late. This is also something that MSC has been very strongly involved in. Of course, this exchange of information between carriers or competitors, it's a problem in every continent due to antitrust legislation. So this is where we try to reach to supranational bodies to make sure that they play this role of gathering the information and on an anonymous basis pass it in real time to the rest of the market. This is something where MSC is really pushing very hard for many years now, and we strongly believe this would be one part of the solution for the future. Voilà, I'm finished. I hope it wasn't too quick. My time was short. It was a lot of information, but I am available for question afterwards. Nick, over to you.
Ron, that was very interesting. I was particularly interested to hear about the Flaminia, in which there was a landmark decision made in the court last year, as my understanding, where the shippers took responsibility for that accident, and I think shippers should beware in the future if they do decide to misdeclare cargo. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, I hope the shipper will take responsibility for that. I mean, the proceeding is still ongoing. So, but indeed, this was a very crucial decision that was rendered by Judge Forrest, and it is without any equivoque. Shippers have to give enough information to make sure that the transit is safe. To make it, the bottom line will be like this. Then I will not go into the technicality as to what kind of documentation and how, but that's really the bottom line. The carriers should be made aware of all the specificity of the cargo, so that first we can store it on board in proper manner, and if something goes bad, which can always happen, we know how to react. And this was not the case in the Flaminia at the time.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Captain Zadok Radica from ZIM. He's going to tell us about ZIM's new ZIMGuard, which protects the ships and the company from the dangerous goods that we've been talking about. Thank you, Captain Radica.
Oh, hello everyone. I'll try to find how this one works. Okay. Got it. Okay, good day everybody. A little bit about the ZIMGuard that we developed in ZIM. A little bit about the background. Or we have the customers that sometimes misdeclare they carry commodities, or the cargo that is not declared as a DG, where they should be. And we also have the booking agents that they don't always have the capability to identify the misdeclared cargoes. And the outcome is that we have cargo on our vessels. This is a high risk DG cargo without the proper safety measures. So we invented the cargo screening solution, and it is developed to identify misdeclared hazardous cargo. Actually, we have two groups of cargo. We have the hazardous cargo and the non-hazardous. About the hazardous cargo, well, it is reviewed by our specialist team, so we don't need to have any special solution for it. But we have the non-hazardous, where we don't have any special handling, assuming that all the cargo is correctly declared. But then what if some of the cargo is misdeclared? And therefore we applied the cargo screening solution. The first solution we had, it started in 2014, and it was based on booking descriptions that was sent for scanning by a third-party company. The third party was sending us a report with the findings, and then the report was analyzed and handled by our team. The concept had disadvantages, like sending the sensitive information to a third party, and the time that took to check the things, and some of the suspicious cargo was already shipped, and it caused extreme workload to handle the findings. The cargo screen overview, we target the population of the cargo that was not declared as hazardous. And the objective is to identify misdeclared cargo in time to enable preventive actions. And we done it by a ZIM self-developed system, identifying suspicious cargo using a sophisticated algorithm and predefined dynamically updated database to try to identify it. The ZIMGuard is using machine learning tools. It's sophisticated AI tools. Actually, we took the ZIM BI data scientists were instructed to develop a model to identify suspicious commodities. It should be integrated in ZIM systems. It should give a real-time alert, so it should work in milliseconds. Actually, it takes the cargo descriptions. Actually, there's a little bit more than the cargo descriptions, but for this presentation, the cargo description go through a machine learning model and an optimization model, and then it will give a hazardous indication. The machine learning process, that's the sophisticated part. It gets data from millions of actual cargo descriptions, hazardous and non-hazardous, that we had in our systems. And then it transforms the data using NLP. NLP is natural language processing, and cleaning the past data. And then it trains the model. The machine learns the description that qualifies as hazardous and non-hazardous. And then there is the optimized layer that adjusts the model results by applying the business knowledge with the vocabulary. The real-time warnings will increase the cargo and vessel safety. Actually, all the supply chain will be safer. It's triggered at the booking stage, the shipping instructions, and the BL stages. That's because in many cases, or in some cases, the description changes from the booking stage to the shipping instructions. It requires, once we get the alert, it will require additional clarifications to verify the nature of the cargo. In cases that we find it is DG, it will change the process from general cargo to DG. And it may result, and actually did, result in shipments that were rejected. And in large bottom line, it will prevent wrong acceptance and handling of the cargo. I have an example from the old concept and the new concept that we have. In the old concept, we send to the third party, we got the report from the third party. In this case, it detected the charcoal, and charcoal, we in ZIM, we do not take it at all. So our team investigate the booking and send query to the booking agent. The booking agent checked and replied that it is actually empty charcoal packaging. So this is non-DG, but it took 3 days to find out. With the new concept, the model detected the charcoal, and the booking system had a pop-up with the warning. The booking agent confirmed it is empty charcoal packaging, paper bags actually, and this took 3 seconds. Now for the summary, we have the major benefits of the system. Obviously, the first one is the safety of the supply chain. The hazardous cargo will be handled correctly. And we have a commercial benefit that the hazardous cargo premium will be applied. And we have a cost avoidance, avoid damages, delays, fines, and bad reputation, both for us as a carrier and also for the customers that sometimes do not know that their cargo is actually DG cargo. So that's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your presentation, Captain Radiger. Our next speaker is going to give us some solutions to some of the problems that we've heard earlier in this seminar. He is the CEO of Exis Technologies. Please welcome James Douglas.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thank you to Container News and the Cargo Integrity Group for giving us the opportunity to speak today. So I'm, as Nick said, CEO of Exis Technologies. I can give you a little bit of an intro to Exis. So we are 100% owned by National Cargo Bureau. National Cargo Bureau, as you can see, was created in the 1950s as a not-for-profit organisation with a mission to promote safety of life and cargo at sea. National Cargo Bureau have been a customer of ours for many years, and 2.5 years ago we agreed this acquisition because we felt Exis fitted nicely into this mission that they have of safety of life and cargo at sea, and it combined the physical expertise of National Cargo Bureau for dangerous goods together with our IT skills in relation to dangerous goods. So a good marriage, effectively. So our business at Exis is 100% to do with helping companies ship dangerous goods by sea. And in that respect, our main product over 30 years has been HazCheck, which is helps companies check declared dangerous goods and make sure they're compliant with the regulations. National Cargo Bureau, they are more on the physical side, so they're making physical inspections of containers. We're really just checking the data, which is obviously an important aspect of it. So to give you a little bit of an idea of HazCheck, so here you can see a slide which represents access points on a typical daily basis. We host HazCheck for a lot of customers worldwide, and this is a sort of a daily heat map of people accessing the product. And as you can see, in a typical month, we're doing 4 million validations of declared dangerous goods shipments. So our big customers are the major container lines. We have 9 of the top 10 container lines using HazCheck to do this validation because they're obliged to make sure the cargo they're receiving is safe, complies with regulations and is safe, and they need to protect the vessels, the crew and the cargo. And a couple of my fellow panelists, MSC and ZIM, for instance, they're using HazCheck for this declared processes. Typically, it's embedded into their booking processes. So, of course, that's, as I say, the main IT aspect we do, but we've also supplied an IT database to help National Cargo Bureau record details of their physical inspections. So they're inspecting dangerous goods containers, physically opening them up. Those can be targeted inspections or they can be completely random. And they're doing 30,000 plus inspections of declared and undeclared cargo shipments over an annual basis. They recently did a Container Safety Inspection Initiative, together with the SINS organization. And to give you an idea, these were import and export units to North America, because that's where NCB had their main surveyor base. And to give you an idea, there was 555 inspections completed, and 274 of those failed. The failures were 43% were securing inside the unit, 39% the placarding and the marking on the outside of the unit, and 12% were found to be misdeclared. So that's a pretty small sample, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's out there. So the point is that even though we check the declared dangerous goods, and then we might inspect some units, it's not possible to inspect every unit, then we were approached by a number of our big container line customers to see if they could help them with a solution to try and detect these undeclared and misdeclared items of cargo at the time of booking and try and stop them before they get loaded onto the vessels. And as we know, as per the seminar, if they get on board the vessels and if things wrong, things can go badly wrong. So we were approached and we considered this at great length, and we determined in the end that this fitted our mission, safety of life and cargo at sea, because it was a big commitment to develop a new solution. So we went ahead and we created Health Check Detect. So Health Check Detect is as it says, is a screening solution where we'll screen details that are supplied to us regarding either the contents of a booking or a bill of lading, and look to find any suspicious terms and report those back to the sending system. The tool, we started developing this tool in February 2019, and it went live with the first customer, which is Maersk Line, in February 2020. So just one year of development, and this went into service. It has very much been developed as a solution for all the industry. And by that, I mean that, yes, we'd like everybody to be using Health Check Detect, but of course, other companies will have their own solutions. And my colleague again on the panel, Captain Zadok from ZIM, they've developed their own solution. So although Health Check Detect carries out the screening function, the real key to this is also the libraries and the ability to share these libraries. So for instance, and we've already discussed this with ZIM, we would be happy to share the data in the libraries that we're using to do the screening with ZIM and vice versa, so that we make sure that if ZIM, for instance, finds using their solution something that's not correct, then we're screening using the same terms and same rules. So we should be able to pick up the same thing. And this is very important because partner lines, for instance, if Maersk detect some hazardous cargo that hasn't been declared and they reject the booking, then that booking the person trying to make the booking may go off to, let's say, MSC and try and make that booking. And if MSC weren't screening on the same terms, and for some reason that booking got accepted, it may end up then back onto a Maersk vessel because they're in a partner line agreement, just using names as examples. So the real important part is that everyone is using the same rules and terms. So in this solution, we have almost 15,000 rules now, and these are built up using knowledge from the industry. So for instance, Axis, we've created 4,500 rules using our knowledge of declared dangerous goods, and those are primarily aimed at the misdeclared bookings. And then we also have, as it says here, about 10,000, just over that now, rules which are looking for undeclared cargo. So that, and most of those rules have been developed with help of Maersk Line, but Maersk Line have agreed that those can be shared with the industry. The other really important thing and unique thing about this is that it's the online or real-time aspect of this. So a booking or a bill of lading data can be screened many times, but most importantly, it can be screened when any last-minute changes come in. Excuse me. So if a customer changes the booking at the last minute or sends the shipping instructions at the last minute, we're able to screen that very quickly and give a response. So in the case of Maersk Line, for instance, they're screening 200,000 more thereabouts screenings per day. This is tied into their own booking system. And in an average week, they're getting somewhere between 500 and 1,000 hits, and roughly about 10% of those, so let's say 50 per week, they're stopping those containers being loaded onto vessels. And it's that real time and last minute access that is the key for them. Okay, so if I just move forward. So the rules themselves, the system kind of learns as it go along, but the rules can be very simple. They could just be, in this example, you could have a single keyword, which is paint. But if you're searching for paint, then you don't want to get false hits. So for instance, if you found paintbrush, probably wouldn't be too interested in that. So you can set exclusions in. So that's one example of the rules that can be built up. But there can be a lot more sophisticated than that. They can take into account locations, port loadings, like customer addresses even, or even customer names. So the rules have quite a lot of complexity in them, and that allows them to eliminate these false hits and focus only on the ones that are very important and need to be tracked. And as I say, that's a learning process, both in terms of machine learning, where we can learn from existing hits and update the rules, but also as we share these rules through the industry, whether that be with ZIM or MSC and Maersk, we each can learn from each other and improve the service. So what we're managing to do here through this screening process and through our declared dangerous goods checking, and also through the data we collect from inspections, what we're doing is building up a data set here. And this data set would also be made available to the industry, and we will allows us to produce data analytics and target in further in terms of the screening, because we can learn from our validation and our inspection to improve the screening rules as well. So a big part of this development is data analytics, which will also be made available to the industry. And a lot of this flows from a white paper that National Cargo Bureau have recently produced, which was a holistic approach to dangerous goods shipments. So this data will very much flow into that. As a little snapshot here of the white paper that they produced in terms of the different aspects that they suggest that the industry needs to look at holistically. And the parts that I've talked about today and other panelists are very much part of that. And I think it crosses over very nicely with the Cargo Integrity Group and the things that they're looking at in relation to packing of units, classification, and documentation of the cargo, and transparency of the data transmitted. So we very much support the Cargo Integrity Group initiative, and we certainly work alongside that, and we hope that our tools will help across the industry. So again, I'd just like to thank you very much for letting me speak today, and hopefully you find that interesting. And I do know you'll get a copy of the slides. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James. That's obviously technology is going to play a major role in resolving some of these issues around cargo integrity. And it's heartening to see that the industry is working together in unison, and hopefully that will move on. Our next speaker is going to talk about the interface between shipping and ports, which is an important consideration. So I'd like to introduce Richard Brough, the head of the International Cargo Handling Coordination Association. Please take it away, Richard.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the invitation to speak today to your delegates. I really appreciate it, and to put our viewpoint across. As you can see from the first slide, I've put up here that dangerous goods are heavily regulated, and that is indeed the case. And just a few of the organizations involved in that process. OSHA is the American regulator, the same as the HSE in the UK. Transport Canada is their equivalent. SAMHSA is the South African equivalent. And of course, you have the United Nations bodies like the UNECE, which is the Economic Commission for Europe, who cover the ADR regulations for road transportation globally, not just in Europe, of course, and inland waterways. And of course, the International Maritime Organization, which is probably the most important body. And just a couple of pictures there of some of the regulations that cover this activity. The IMDG code itself, the Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, the CTU code, which is the one in the middle, and the IMS-BC code, which is the one for dangerous bulk cargoes. So this is all important stuff. But here's a poser for you. Since 1916, there have been over 34 major incidents, many hundreds of smaller ones, with ammonium nitrate leading to over 2,000 deaths, many thousands of injuries, and billions of pounds worth in damage. And why is that the case? If this is such a regulated playing field, why are these things still happening? Of course, we're all conscious of what happened in Tianjin a couple of years ago. Massive explosion, massive fire. The firefighters didn't really know what they were dealing with. Well over 170 firefighters were killed. A metro station 3 miles away was totally destroyed. Hundreds of homes and businesses devastated. Billions of pounds worth of damage. And people prosecuted for not following the rules. In fact, I think a couple of the people responsible for the warehouse have actually got a death penalty imposed upon them by the Chinese government. And ammonium nitrate was included here, but many other chemicals as well, of course. And more recently, which will be prominent in most people's minds, is the explosion in Beirut of ammonium nitrate stored in a warehouse. It was stored there incidentally. It wasn't meant to be there. It was the arrest of a vessel that hadn't paid its port fees. And then the authorities wrangled over it for several years while the cargo just deteriorated. And then sadly, the jury's still out. It looks like somebody may be doing some hot work adjacent to the warehouse. That ignited some fireworks, and the fireworks exploded, and then the ammonium nitrate itself went off like a bomb. Probably the biggest explosion in peacetime since the Second World War. Now, you can see at the top of the screen here, there's a link to the New York Times, and the link's not going to work on my laptop today. But if delegates would like to go and have a look at that, it shows a timeline of the explosion, which you can walk through yourself. I've actually included a couple of slides here. This is the first timeline. You can see my cursor on the screen here, where you can see the fireworks going off, those little white flashes within the first smoke cloud. Then on the second slide, you can see where it starts to become much, much more active. And then you've got the big fire, and then this water vapor cloud in the bottom slide in the middle, where the ammonium nitrate itself is starting to explode. And then, of course, the devastation to the buildings around there. And this to a country which has had turmoil for many, many decades and has practically brought it to its knees. Like I said earlier, the jury is still out on what's going to happen with this and what really went wrong. But what went wrong is clearly a catastrophic failure in the accountability of various people within the container supply, the cargo supply chain, where things haven't been adhered to properly. And does this happen anywhere else? Well, here's an example. This is just a graphic of a do not cross line. This is in Charleston, Carolina, where I went a couple of years ago for a meeting of the North American Safety Administration. And just before we got there, the port had been closed because there was rumors of a dirty bomb being inside the container terminal. A dirty bomb, of course, is an unknown source of radioactivity. They found something radioactive, but they don't know what it is. And this happened in Italy a couple of years ago, where they found a radioisotope inside a container of scrap from the Middle East. It took them a year to deal with that container incident, because where do you put it? If you find an unknown source of radioactivity, what do you do? So they had to isolate the container, construct a robot to deconstruct the container, and then they eventually found it was a spent medical isotope. But that cost over €1 million, with obviously months of disruption to the terminal. So these things have got to be seriously considered. Do terminals, ports and terminals, have proper procedures in place to deal with these kind of incidents? Here's another one. This is a container smoking away in Vancouver, in the middle of Vancouver, next to the cruise terminal, a terminal called Centerm, Central Terminal. Fire brigade are just cooling down, boundary cooling, because they're not sure what to do, what's inside it. They can't tell because it's inside the stack. It turned out to be trichlorocyanuric acid, which was also involved in Tianjin in actual fact. And had they put water inside that container, it would have reacted violently and exploded. So while we think these steel boxes are quite innocuous and just carrying cargoes around the world, if people aren't declaring those cargoes properly and dealing with what they should deal with due to the legislation of these pretty serious chemicals, then it exposes us all to a certain degree of risk. I was in a European country a couple of years ago carrying out some audits, and to take 2 intermodal rail terminals, one of them had a leak in a container full of dangerous chemicals, and they carried out an investigation. They moved the container to a safe area. They were hosing down and spraying and keeping the thing dampened down all the time. They documented the whole thing, took photographs, dealt with the fire and rescue services in a very effective way, so that if anything went wrong in the future, they could deal with that situation again very effectively. I went to another rail terminal in the same country, and they had a haphazard system. There was dangerous chemicals stored all over the place, tank containers full of some of the most difficult chemicals, people welding on trailers next to the tanks, fork trucks and other vehicles moving around in a haphazard manner. And I went into the office, and the managing director said to me, "What do you think, Richard?" And I said, "Well, I think you've got a disaster here waiting to happen. How long have you been operating?" He said, 40 years. And I said, "When was the last time you carried out a practice with the fire and rescue service?" "Well, we've never done that." And when you look outside his window, 500 meters away was a school, primary school, and a housing estate. Now that's a mini Tianjin just waiting to happen, and that can't be allowed to continue. And these are not isolated examples. There are many. This is a case where this is another picture of the fire in the container in Vancouver, in actual fact. And you can see that the operators of these cranes wouldn't have been very happy with this toxic smoke going past their cabins. So these are things that need to be contained properly, and ports and terminals need to have a proper assessment of what they do in an emergency situation. This is a fire in Santos in Brazil a couple of years ago, which the chemical involved was chloric acid. And chloric acid and dichlorocyanurate, I'm sorry about these technical terms, that's quite a toxic mix, and quite a few people were injured. And the rain that comes out of these toxic clouds can cause all sorts of skin and inhalation damage. This is a picture some of you will have seen. I can't show the video today, but there was a fire on a container ship in Thailand. And you can see them in the top right picture there trying to pick up the pieces after the event itself. 2,000 people were injured here and hospitalized for acid burns, chemical reactions. Many of the containers that exploded on board the ship shot 200 meters into the air. And this was misdeclared dangerous cargo. They hadn't even declared what it was. Had they done so, then the shipping line would not have stored these containers on the vessel in the location that they did. So that's why we need good information, good accurate information by shippers declaring what they actually have, the shipping lines, the port authorities being able to deal with that appropriately, and then these chemicals, where they're kept under safe conditions, are not as dangerous as this. Even very small incidents, P&O Ferry in Hull, they had a very small chemical spill on the deck. 6 fire engines had to turn out for that. That's a standard turnout in the UK. 12 operatives injured during a chemical leak in Long Beach. So you have major incidents, you have smaller incidents. But what unites them all is that these are all preventable. The information is there. Why aren't people using that information? Why did they not use the information in Beirut that ammonium nitrate, if it's not looked after properly, is a potentially very dangerous chemical? And this, even now we're having a post-COVID incident. This is a release of styrene gas from a chemical plant in India, where they'd gone back after the COVID lockdown to reopen the plant, and they actually released the styrene gas over 3 or 4 villages in the immediate neighborhood. They dealt with that incident, then they went back and released it again, and it spread even further. And 11 people died as a consequence. One person shouldn't have to die for anything like this. The death toll in Beirut is over 300, with 6,000 people injured, 300,000 people made homeless. Now, we know we have to have this trade worldwide. It's very important. But we need to get a grip of the rules the regulations, and make everybody in the supply chain aware of what they need to do to make sure nothing like this happens. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Richard, for a hugely interesting presentation. Some really interesting slides there. That just about wraps up the presentations for our second seminar. And I thought it was very interesting to see how we started off talking about the shippers and how they pack the containers, knowing how to pack them, what's going in, what effects might have with the movement of the ship, etc. And the quick guide, of course, produced by the Cargo Integrity Group, which ICHCA is a part, and TT Club, our sponsors. Then we moved on to the shipping lines who, we heard about the Flaminia, huge fire, 3 deaths. Again, a cargo that should have been easily dealt with had the right communications been made between the shipper and the shipping line and the port. Then we heard from Richard with the ports and the lack of communication about what was being stored in those ports. There are some solutions with EXIS and ZIMGuard. We heard from those two. That's a step forward. But I think what ties all this together is the idea that communications within the industry needs to improve. So that's possibly the thing to go away and think of. Thank you very much to all our speakers today. Great presentations, and thank you to our sponsors and for the support shown to us from ICHCA and TT Club. Now we move on to the question and answer section of our webinar. And the first question will be going to Peregrine Storrs-Fox from TT Club. And I think you've touched on this, Peregrine, but someone wants some more information here. Do we believe that the current IMDG legislation has kept pace with the number of dangerous goods being shipped? And is the legislation effectively ancient?
Well, certainly the legislation is ancient in the sense that IMDG itself was derived from the bulk dangerous goods code initially. So there's a sense in which, as it has moved from bulk to containerized, perhaps hasn't taken account of all the risks involved. And the risks involved within a container unit obviously are very different from the entire hold on board a ship. So there's that element. The fact that we continually have more cargoes added, but they're added quite often to the class 9, as I said earlier, which is the most innocuous of the classifications. And we've seen that in relation to some major incidents where there has been a reclassification or a call for reclassification following the incident. So that's happened with the MSC Flaminia. The cargo involved there was at the time correctly classified under class 9, but was subsequently moved from 4 to 4.2 as a flammable, highly flammable substance. And the same comment has been raised, or question has been raised, in the Maersk Honam report, that cargo potentially should not be classified as class 9. So there's a classification issue. As I mentioned before, there's the complexity issue, pure complexity as to what packing group, all sorts of different elements that are relevant to each cargo. And then, as I mentioned, also special provisions that may reduce the application of a code and make it more difficult for a carrier to understand whether things are being correctly declared, packaged, packed, and processed through the supply chain. So all those do point to the fact that we've got an unhelpful environment which is difficult to navigate and may not be conducive even to overall digitization, which might be one way out in the 21st century. Hopefully that kind of answers the issue at hand.
That's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much for that. And for our next question, it will go to Laurent from MSc again. Laurent, if enforcement is a key to control, is there really an appetite for it to be applied by national authorities or terminal operators? According to the person who asked this question, I think it was Peter LaHaye from Canada, he has his doubts. What do you say?
No, I wouldn't be that pessimistic. Every time we have to deal with authorities, there is a serious. First, we see always very versed people in front of us. This is always something that surprised me. I shouldn't be, I guess, but every time we have to talk with people working for enforcement authorities, whether it's customs or else, they know our business very well. And there is an appetite, undoubtedly. I wouldn't agree to what was said. There is an appetite, but as I mentioned earlier, the financing are scarce everywhere. Those people don't have always the means they deserve to have or they should have to be efficient. And most of the time, they fight with a very sophisticated smuggling activity. So it's extremely difficult and unfair toward them. And this is why we need to pool our information to be more efficient with less financial means. This is really the conclusion of the assessment we have been doing over those years.
Thank you. And actually, the next question also goes to you, Laurent. Can port operators have easy access to SDS of dangerous goods and non-dangerous goods? It's very important to assess the risk, like dangerous atmospheres in the hold, handling calamities, health risks. UN numbers are mostly too general.
To be frank, I'm not into the details of what documents are really actually passed to the terminal operator. One thing is certain, though, and which I know for a fact, is that we give information about dangerous goods. I would suspect the terminal operator gets first the list of the containers through the manifest and get on top of that the dangerous good declaration. This information is indeed crucial to them. So there is no way carriers would go the risk of letting a container enter with dangerous goods without providing transparency as to what is inside. Then once again, we can only give what we receive. If the information received upstream is wrong, then we convey wrong information down the line.
Thank you. Richard, I'd like to get your perspective on this question of do we believe that the current international maritime dangerous goods legislation has kept pace with the number of dangerous goods being shipped? Is the legislation ancient?
Well, the legislation's been around for quite some time, Nick, and does it keep pace with continuing developments in the chemical industry and transportation? It tries. But it's a slow process to get legislation through the IMO and the United Nations can actually take quite a long time. We're still working on the amendments of the 1973 Container Convention, would you believe? So it's a slow process because there's many nations involved, many NGOs involved. I think that the regulations on IMDG do move fairly quickly, but one of the things we're trying to do at the moment is look at the special provisions. So, for example, there was the fire on the Maersk Honam a couple of years ago where 5 seafarers died, and that was once again chemicals that were stored correctly according to the IMDG guidelines, but it didn't work for that vessel at that particular time. So the special provisions are sometimes seen by the shippers as an opportunity to evade some of the more stringent legislation. So that's something we're looking at now. Also, of course, the nations and the NGOs are feeding in information all the time about incidents, problems, challenges that they face to the IMO, particularly where the home of the IMDG is, dominated, of course, by the United Nations Special Working Group in Geneva. But as I've said, it does take quite a long time for these things to go through. Once you have a major incident, then clearly they sit up and take notice a little bit more clearly. Ammonium nitrate, for example, we had the fire on the bulk carrier, the Cheshire, a couple of years ago, where she was off Las Palmas for a while, looking for somewhere to go before she exploded. And that starts to focus people's minds. Liquefaction in bulk cargoes, that started to focus people's minds. But I think what's sad, Nick, is that we have to wait for a major disaster before serious action is taken.
And now we come to our last question. And Richard, I'd like to go back to you, please, with this question. Can port operators have easy access to safety data sheets or for dangerous goods and non-dangerous goods? It's very important to assess the risk and the dangerous atmospheres in the hold, handling calamities, health risks and catastrophes, etc. UN numbers are mostly too general, says our listener.
And they can be. Port operators do have access to the information, of course. And it's an important question here because it also mentions non-dangerous goods. And commodities like fish oil and palm oil can actually be dangerous in certain circumstances. We had a situation in South America a couple of years ago where there was a flexi tank inside a 40-foot container. It wasn't placarded, it wasn't labeled, so they didn't know. And then I had an incident with the crane where the container dropped onto the quayside, and actually it was 24 tons of fish oil inside the flexi tank. And that caused them some significant problems, both on the terminal and in the harbour, with the resultant pollution. So yes, it is a challenge, but it's all about communication. The data sheets themselves are a form of communication. And I think some of you in the audience have maybe heard me say before, the most important things in any given situation are the 5 C's. And you could argue that those 5 C's are communication, 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 communication. But in reality, the 5 C's are communications, control. Somebody needs to be in control of the information. Somebody has a responsibility to pass that on. You have competence. You need people in the supply chain who are competent in what they're doing. They understand what they need to do with that cargo and the consequences where something could go wrong. You need cooperation throughout the supply chain. And you need continuous improvement, which is the point about the IMD regulations. If you know something is wrong, let's get together and fix it. So that it always comes back to those 5 C's. And dangerous atmospheres in holds, that's killed over 120 people in the last 10 years. And sometimes that's not dangerous chemicals, that's things like steel, which is rusting and it absorbs the oxygen, or even bark on timber. And this is a terrible situation. And the information is there, the guidance is out there. Why aren't people looking at the information? I've always said that if you're up in front of the judge and the judge says to you, did you know that information existed? And he said, no. He said, well, that's no defense. You've got to find out. So ports and terminals and people with control and responsibility for cargoes, they need to make sure they have the information at their disposal. And if they don't know, there's plenty of places to go to ask.
We have a question now for Captain Z. Radica. Captain Radica, you gave the example of the empty charcoal bags as a detection, but how many actual detections of dangerous goods has your system made, and can you be confident that that most of the DG cargoes have been detected?
Well, yes, we have quite a lot of examples that we detected dangerous cargo, and in some cases even cargoes that are not allowed on the vessels. For example, last week we had a booking that was furniture, was bamboo furniture, and later on in the shipping, so there was no alert, and later on in the shipping instructions it was changed to coconut shell something, and then with the coconut shell something it triggered the alert, and we investigated and found out it was actually shisha pipe charcoal, a commodity that we have very bad experience in ZIM. We had a major fire on one of our vessels with $2 million damages. So we stopped this shipment. Obviously, in shipping instructions, the commodity was already stuffed in the container, and we returned the container to the shipper and unstuffed it, and we rejected the commodity, and we also blacklist the client. Nick, you're on mute, so I cannot hear you.
Sorry. Can you be sorry about that? Can you be confident that you're picking up the majority of undeclared or misdeclared cargo?
Well, yes. According to the numbers that we are seeing, then I'm quite confident that we are picking up most of the DG or the misdeclared cargo. But obviously, it cannot be 100%. To be 100%, you have to open each container physically, and that's something that is not feasible.
And another question for you, Captain Radika. Is ZIMGuard currently only available to Zim? And if it is, will you be making it? Will you be marketing it to other lines?
Well, after a few months that we are using it in Zim and we see very good results, we decided to also market it. So it will be available at some stage. I don't know exactly when, but it will be available in the market soon.
Thank you very much. Our next question is for James Douglas. James, this is an ever-changing landscape. How do the rules and keywords get updated in the software to ensure it remains relevant?
Yes, thank you. Good question. Yeah, I mean, the product itself has an interface, user interface, although you can also upload or download rules as well. So the users effectively have control of that. They can adjust and modify the rules on a daily basis. You can activate the rules, you can deactivate them. You can actually create whole libraries that could be deactivated. So you may have a particular search sequence that you want to apply at maybe different times of years or different service routes, specifically out of a certain country or certain region. So they're fully adaptable in that way. But as I mentioned also, one of the keys here is the ability to share the rules. So as different users are modifying and managing the rules, we're encouraging everybody to share those as well. Because if for instance, you're searching for, say, you want to find calcium hypochlorite, which has caused a lot of problems with different shipments, then if you have a good term that you find that's picking up a lot of those undeclared terms, then it's really very much in your interest to share that with the other carriers, either ones who are using HasJet Detect or those who aren't. So the sharing of rules and that functionality in HasJet Detect is very much key to this. Last one, I mentioned machine learning a couple of times, and that does fit into this as well, in the sense that the solution as we move forward will also look and make suggestions for new rules or modifications to rules. So it's not always going to be down to the users having to do those updates. The machine learning will also help with that. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Well, that brings us sadly to the end of our second seminar in the Cargo Integrity Seminar Series. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their great presentations. I'd like to thank our sponsors, TT Club, and the support that we've been shown from industry as a whole. So thank you, and please do come to our third and final seminar in this series on the 29th of October, next Thursday. That will be on lashing and lashing issues. Thank you and goodbye.